Let's have a great day.
Morning, everybody. How are we doing?
Great.
Good. Welcome. I'm going to start with launching. I want to talk a little bit about this project. So this is. Anybody know where this is? If you've been here before, and Aaron, you can't tell me. Where is it?
It's that Russian settlement.
Yeah. So this is Fort Ross, right? So this is about an hour and a half, 2 hours from here, I would say, approximately. This is a Russian fort. This fort was actually built to harvest sea otters. So we had the sea otter that would sit right out here, and they would feed off of the sea urchins, and those sea urchins would feed off of the kelp. And the Russians actually enslaved a lot of Alaskans, brought them down, and then in this fort would go out and they would hunt these sea otters, and then they would trade those furs with the Chinese. And they did that because they were obviously able to make good money, and it was a really great trade, but it eradicated the sea otter. There's actually no sea otter now in the North Pacific. You might see a few in Monterey as they're looking at releasing those, but for the most part, it's gone. Right? That population has been decimated by hunting. It's a really interesting fort, actually. This is the furthest south we've ever seen a Russian Orthodoxy church. So if you go out here, this is a Russian fort when they were here. And the question that I'd be asking our learners is, should we reintroduce the sea otter into this particular part of the ocean? Should that actually be an animal that we actually reintroduce? Right? That might be a project that I might launch with learners. And it's an interesting concept to look at because right now these kelp beds, right, the forest of the ocean here, is being decimated by sea urchins. These urchins, there's nothing that's really going after them. And sea otters don't have blubber like most of the pinnipeds that we have out there. So if you go out here, you're going to see Guadalupe, fur seal. You might see some elephant seals. You'll definitely see harbor seals, California sea lions, right? A lot of the pinnipeds that if you go out right now, you would be able to take a look at. But they all have blubber. But sea otters don't. And so they have to eat constantly, right? So this is a real crisis in the ocean. But I want us to look at this project and think a little bit about what are kids thinking about when I launch a project like that. So when they go home that night, right? So we're talking about sea otters. And they go home at night and their parents ask, "What'd you learn today?" What are they going to say? Sea otters. Now, there is no standard anywhere in the world, anywhere, and I was just in Russia. They don't have one either. And there's nothing anywhere where it says you need to know about sea otters. Thou shalt learn sea otters. Right? The standard is actually students being able to understand how energy moves from producers, those that actually take in sunlight, to then consumers, right? Something like a sea otter. That's really what the standards are. We see that in kindergarten. So if you look at the next gen standards, you see that in kindergarten. You see that again like in 4th and 5th grade. You see it in 7th grade. You see it in biology. You see it in AP biology. And then again, you see it when you go into college. Right? This wave of standards. But students don't think that. Students think we are studying sea otters. So what happens at the end of this project? Kids come in. They have got the best presentation. The slide deck is amazing. Right? It's got like some transitions that you're looking at being like, how do you do that? Right? So you're sitting there saying, this is the coolest YouTube video / slide deck / keynote that I've ever seen in my life. The only thing in the back of your mind that you're sitting there is you're saying, I don't think they know anything about the content. But they know a lot about the tech, and they know a lot about sea otters. And that's the problem. If you've all done projects, you all have felt this way. You've all felt that the kids actually don't know the core content. We have what we would call impoverished deep learning. They've got some ideas, but they don't know it. They sound like a politician. Greenhouse gases are bad. Yes, what's a greenhouse gas? Don't know, but they're bad. Right? And in the United States, it's probably the inverse, right? We don't care about greenhouse gases anymore. What are greenhouse gases? Don't know, don't care. Right? Whatever it is, usually what happens is students don't know the actual core content that's behind or underneath this particular context. And this is why, as we're going to see in a little bit, problem and project-based learning doesn't have much of an effect on learning. Now you're probably like, then why on earth are we here? Because we're going to talk about why it actually could be a really effective methodology, but we have to really understand what is its real purpose, and we also need to be able to take a look and say, what are some of the things that can run amok in terms of student learning? Because really this is what we want. I want students, if they got done with this project, around sea otters to be able to then apply it into different contexts. Because it's not about sea otters. It is the idea that, so let's back up. Let's take a look at this. Golden Eagle, Altamont Pass, right? An hour from here or 6 hours by traffic, right? So when you get here, they built these big wind turbines that are decimating the Golden Eagle, right? Now it's important to have these wind turbines. Great alternative form of energy, and there's a lot of wind in the Altamont Pass. So it makes a lot of sense to put big wind farms there. The only problem is that golden eagles, when they hunt, they look down. And as they're looking down, they run right into these turbines, and we're seeing the populations drop. This is the same project as this one. So is this one. Niagara Falls. We built canals around Niagara because they found that it was hard to take a boat over the falls, right? Works in a barrel, doesn't really work in a giant boat, right? So they built these huge canals. And then what happened is that these sea lanterns that look like these giant leeches, they also got through the Atlantic Ocean into the Great Lakes. And so this invasive species is now decimating the lake trout in Lake Michigan and many of the other lakes. I just don't know the names of them, but that's one of the ones I know. I'm just kidding. Gray wolf, reintroducing the gray wolf. Same project. My daughter, 7, she loves Misty of Assateague. If you haven't read this book, now it's fake. I need you to know this. Like, they really didn't come from like a Spanish ship, but because I had to read about that. But these things, these horses that are in Maryland and Assateague, people love going to see them. The only problem is that they're not from there. They're not from there. I don't know if Swivel can hear that. So they actually are invasive. They destroy that area, Assateague. But the only reason that this place is protected and people go is to see the wild horses that technically aren't wild. And so what this is what we would call a desirable exotic. It's not from here, but we like it as humans, so we're going to keep it. If there was a mosquito, it's out. But the horses, we will keep them in there. Now, all of these are important situations that we want learners to be able to take the core content and say, I can apply it here, I can apply it here, I can apply it here. Here we're talking about putting something back in, similar to the wolf. This we're talking about taking out. This is in my backyard to protect me from my neighbors. It's called bamboo. It's wonderful. It also is not from here, and it's invasive. And if you get it in your soil, it will take everything else out. If you've ever removed or put bamboo in, it's pretty amazing, the root system. It's elaborate, and it destroys everything else. Here we have something where we have an alternative form of energy in a local context that is also destroying a population that's currently there, and we're facing this problem now. And then you have the desirable exotic. In any of these, what I want learners to be able to do is to cut across any context, any situation, and to be able to apply core content. That's the idea behind PBL, to be able to transfer knowledge, transfer skills, and apply it in any situation, and not go home at night and say, we're studying otters. That's the point of this particular work. Because when that happens, I want us to always remember this kind of adage. Memory is the residue of thought. What you think about becomes part of your memory. If kids are thinking about otters, if kids are thinking about Russian forts, if you go on a field trip and say, oh, we're going to study the Russian fort, and then they go in there and they pet all the furs, and then they go home, they're going to be thinking about petting furs, they're going to be thinking about sea otters, and they're going to be thinking about Russian forts. Not that those aren't good things to be thinking about, but they have to be able to think about that and how it relates to core content. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and over the next couple days. So before we launch into a project, I want to throw one other thing at you, and I'll just quickly tell this story, and then we'll look at our entry event. Many of you have engaged in problem and project-based learning before. And what I'm going to say to you today and over the next couple days is that some of this is going to feel quite awkward to you. Some of the things I'm going to propose to you, you might fundamentally disagree with as a problem and project-based learning teacher. And what I would ask you is hold that tension and give this a go for just a minute. Even just for these 3 days, say, I want to at least tinker with some of these ideas. And so I'll relate that to a story of Wilt Chamberlain. So for those of you who don't know a lot about Wilt Chamberlain, I will only share one part, his basketball career. But there was a time in 1968, somewhere in the 1960s, he was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. He scored 100 points in a game. No one has broken that record, not even Steph Curry. I know, it's hard to believe. But no one's broken this record since the 1960s. The interesting thing about this game is that when he scored 100 points, his free throw percentage nearly doubled. Well, more than doubled. His free throw percentage was right around 47, 48% for his entire career. But in this game, it was over 98%, like 97, 98%. He hit almost every single free throw in this game. Why? Because he shot the granny shot. So if you haven't seen the granny shot, this is Rick Barry, played for the Golden State Warriors, so for those of you who are fans. And this is how he shot a free throw. Right? So he shot it using the granny shot. Now, research, so here's the thing. Research would say that the granny shot, if you go now, University of Chicago would say that the granny shot is the best way, it is the most consistent way of getting a ball into a basket. And think about this. For those of you who are in physics, if you have a ball, if you have a basketball and you are to hold it with one hand, with this hand just trying to set it like this and then push it, is that a better way of getting a ball into a hoop than to take two hands and then laterally and then throw it like this? Which way is actually a better way of getting a ball into the hoop? It is the granny shot. No one uses the granny shot. Tonight, pick a game, any game, watch them do free throws. No one does it. If any of you watch anything in the NCAA, no one does the granny shot. Even though the research is that compelling. And what I'm going to be sharing this week is that it's going to feel like the granny shot. That's what it's going to feel like. Some of these things are going to be like, yes, that makes sense in terms of research, but I don't like it. And so what I would say is, then you might not do that. But I would ask this group for the next 3 days, give the granny shot a go for these 3 days. And if you go back on Monday and say, even if the granny shot's the right way to go, I'm going to go back to my way of doing free throws, you might do that. Because I believe that what's happening in this game, because Rick Barry still is one of the only people who ever did this. He has the highest free throw percentage ever, consistently ever in the game. And it is because of using the granny shot. Wilt Chamberlain only did it in one game. Even though he broke a record. Even though after doing this, he more than doubled his free throw percentage. He quit. And he quit because the fans didn't like it, even though he scored 100 points. They were like, we don't like this. Even though the coaches didn't like it, his team didn't like it, the other team obviously didn't like it, right? But everyone told them, don't do that. And what I will say is that you will also feel some of that pressure as you go back. If you give this a go for the next couple days, there's going to be some things in here that you're going to be like, I don't know if kids are going to like this. Because it's going to push them incredibly hard in terms of their academic learning over time. So what do we think? We want to give this a go? Okay, so the way we'll start is on page 5 and 6. There's an entry event. I'd like you to read that entry event. And then as a team, and then on page 6, you're going to see some success criteria. I'd like you to read that. And then as a group, have a conversation about what you know from this and what you need to know. And we're going to come back in a few minutes and talk about it.